Welcome back. Today we're going to be concluding our discussion of philosophic topics before we turn to the intellectual roots questions of where does secular humanistic Judaism get its ideas from and what were previous examples of our approach to life. But today we're going to conclude the philosophical exploration with a question of past and present. Another way of asking that question is older better or is newer better? So we can even think about examples from general life. What are some examples where you might say newer is better or you might say older is better?
Medicine.
Okay, medicine, newer is probably better. All right.
Music.
Music, you could, that's
I
a
would
perennial
debate
debate.
that one.
Sorry, what was the question? Was it
Or newer?
where older or newer is better, or where newer is better?
Whichever you prefer. You can.
Yeah, older is better.
Okay. So some might argue older music is better. I mean, this is the endless debate of between the generations of your music is just noise and my music is good.
So far, I think being older is better.
Okay, there's wisdom that comes with age.
I don't think I ever
Well, I
would
don't know
want to
so
be a
much about the
teenager
wisdom,
again.
but
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to be a teenager.
Well,
Yeah.
I'll give you an example of something that's where older is a little bit better. The audio quality on an LP record is actually truer to life than the digital music you'll find in most CDs or
Really?
MP3s. It sort of flattens out some of the sound. And people say if you have the right equipment with the right needles, and the proper sensitivity and so on, an LP can actually produce better quality sound. Some would argue that reading physical books is either better for retention or simply a more pleasurable experience than reading on an e-reader or an iPad or something like that.
I used to think that till I got a Kindle.
And
I still get the newspaper every day. I like the reading in the
I
newspaper.
do too. But there's less and less in it, Alan. I mean.
Yes.
Oh,
Well, and it's true. I like Kindles too. And what I love about the Kindle, first of all, my eyes don't get tired because they've got it not backlit in the right way. And secondly, I can carry 1,000 books
That's
in
right,
one
yeah.
thing,
No,
and I can buy a new one anytime I want, wherever I am.
Yeah.
And actually, the one I have, I've had for like 10 or 15 years. It's still clunking along.
oh, good.
If I
They
charge
last
it,
that long?
they might last a long time. I mean, it's not working that well. It's on 3G on some kind of, Wi-Fi.
Yeah,
whatever,
I've got
but-
the old one. She's got the newer one that's backlit.
But it doesn't matter. The point is that sometimes the newer technology works, but if I want to take notes, I'll be honest, jotting notes in the margin on a regular book, or if I'm looking to do a program, I actually find having the regular book with Post-it notes a lot more facile than trying to type in the location number and jump to the right spot on the Kindle.
Never been able
It
to
doesn't
figure
work
it
as
out.
well. So
For research, I find that physical books are way better than electronic.
So sometimes older is better, sometimes newer is better. Certainly, if you think about social phenomena like gender roles, right, or acceptance of, gender and sexuality diversity that we have today, present is much better than past, even recent past. So we certainly have made progress in many ways. But this is the question that comes up when you start talking about a buzzword in Jewish life, which is tradition. And often, if you had to rate tradition as a positive or a negative word, most people look at tradition as a positive thing. It's what your ancestors did, it's the heritage they passed down, it's the ceremonies that we've celebrated, it has sort of warm fuzzies attached to it in many cases. But, if you talk about traditional lifestyles, or quote, traditional marriage, which by the way wasn't free marriage for love, it was an arranged marriage at age 13. I mean, it wasn't anything like what people think it is in political discourse. But the reality is that tradition was a much more complicated, more restrictive world in many ways than we imagined it to be. So people will sometimes come to me for a wedding and they'll say, I want a traditional wedding. And I'll say to them, oh, are you segregating men and women on different sides of the... No, we're not doing... Oh, so you're waiting till after sundown on a Saturday in June, so it's going to start at 9 o'clock. No. Well, so what do you mean by traditional? They want it to feel authentic. They want to have the things they think of as what you see at a Jewish wedding, and they want to feel like their ancestors would have approved in some way, or that it's simply that their guests will recognize it as a Jewish ceremony. Now, that can include having some Hebrew, even if it's not traditional Hebrew. It could be a modified humanistic blessing that's in Hebrew, and that's traditional, it sounds, it feels traditional enough for them. You could have both the groom and the bride break a glass. Doesn't only have to be one. Or you could have two grooms. That's fine too. I mean, again, sometimes you have a same-sex couple that says, I want a traditional Jewish wedding. And, well, again, what does traditional mean to them? It doesn't mean the old-fashioned way, because they wouldn't be getting married. It means redolent or, echoing of that past. And sometimes people who are less traditional emphasize their tradition even more. So I remember I went to 2 weddings once in a 1-month period for friends of my wife's family. And one of them was in a Reformed temple and one of them was in a conservative temple. And even though the conservative service was more traditional in the sense of historic Jewish practice, the Reform rabbi used the word tradition a lot more. It's sort of the protesting too much or trying to compensate. You're admitting the fact that you've shifted, but you feel like tradition is a valuable thing, and so you want to, compensate for that in some way. Or you might live a very non-traditional lifestyle out of synagogue, but when you go into synagogue, you want to put on the kippah, you want to put on the tallis prayer shawl, you want to use more and more Hebrew, because that's authentic. Even if I'm going to get in my car to drive home on Saturday and stop at the barbecue place for some ribs, and that's a separate category of thinking. But the tradition becomes a kind of compensatory practice for what you're doing every day. There's even an invention of something recently called kosher style. Now, what does kosher style mean? A lot of camps, for example, are kosher style. Well, kosher style means you don't necessarily have 2 different sets of dishes for meat and for dairy. You don't necessarily always have kosher meat as the kind of meat that you eat. You don't necessarily wait 3 hours after having meat before you have the ice cream. But you don't have a cheeseburger. You don't serve bacon, right? You're not obviously breaking the rules. That's kosher style. And there are people who live a kosher style life, or they're kosher at home but not kosher when they eat out, or they're kosher when they eat out but not kosher when they eat at home. I know people that had relatives who would secretly cook bacon in the basement once in a while, as a secret transgression.
Sweet and sour pork in the basement.
Yeah. Well, there's a joke about a guy traveling back into the United States, and they open up his luggage and they find 5 sets of dentures. And so they ask, why 5 sets of dentures? Well, there's the milk and the meat dentures, and then there's the kosher for Passover milk dentures, and the kosher for Passover meat dentures, and of course the treif dentures for the not kosher food. So someone who would go to those lengths, this is a joke, someone that would go to those lengths to keep track of all those different categories, but then would still have non-kosher food, but would have a separate set of dentures so it didn't mix up with the other stuff. So this is the compromises that people make when they're living a less than fully traditional lifestyle. I sometimes will point people to actually look at the lyrics of the song Tradition from Fiddler on the Roof. Because again, people have a warm feeling for it. It's supposed to be about the old country where all of our families came from if we're Ashkenazi Jews. And the world it describes is a world of arranged marriage, of rigid gender roles. The kids get hit in the school. It's rote recitation learning. The ideal for men is to recite prayers in the synagogue, not to, either intellectually explore the world or to achieve in other ways. And, it's not the world we would want to live in. In fact, it wasn't the world our grandparents wanted to live in because they left that world. They went out on purpose. And many of them left even before they left Eastern Europe. They left the shtetl and the rural and semi-rural communities for the cities. I mean, there's a reason why Warsaw was the biggest Jewish settlement before World War II, because all those countryside Jews had moved to the big city because that was more interesting. So, and had become secularized in many cases as well. There was a huge audience for the early Yiddish and Hebrew writers who themselves had left an Orthodox life and were describing people doing the same. They were talking to their compatriots who had had the same experience. So there's a reason why people left tradition, because it was stultifying, it was limiting, it was restrictive, it was backward-looking and not forward-looking, because a world of tradition prized the past, prized what the ancestors did, prized this is the way we've always done it. In fact, there's even a word in Hebrew that's not halacha, which is law, it's minhag. Minhag in Hebrew means custom. It's customary to do this. But minhag begins to take on the force of law after a while. because this is the way we've always done it, and this is what you always do. Technically, wearing a kippah, the head covering for men, is not halakha, it's not law, it's a minhag, it's custom. But it has become so customary in so many Jewish communities that it has now taken on a kind of force of law to it.
Where did it come from?
Well, the concept is that you cover your head in the presence of God, and if God is everywhere, then you're in sort of a humble position. If you actually read the laws about that in a collection of Jewish law called the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, it follows immediately after the rule that a woman can't walk in front of a man because he might be tempted by her.
So is this Talmudic? Does that come out of that, or?
It's post-Talmud.
Post-Talmud?
Yeah, we're talking quite a ways after the Talmud. There's nothing in the Talmud that says you have to have your head covered directly, as if it's a clear law that everyone has to
So
follow.
it's just like European medieval.
And also Middle Eastern too. There's a tradition of head covering in Sephardic and Mizrahi communities too. They have different styles of head covering, but there is a tradition to cover the head in some way. But in the end, it's this concept that the minhag, the custom, becomes a force of law, and people will say this is the way we've always done it. So I'll sometimes demonstrate to people how non-traditional they are by showing them a passage that's read in Orthodox synagogues every day as part of the weekly daily service. It's called the 13 Principles of Faith. This is by Maimonides. So this is part of the weekly Orthodox prayer service, written by Maimonides, and each one of these begins with, I believe with perfect faith. And in case anybody ever tries to tell you, Judaism never tells you what you have to believe, well, here's a text that's recited that's a doxology. It's, I believe with perfect faith. Now, spoiler alert, I score 0 for 13 on this list.
Wow.
So we'll see how others do. I believe with perfect faith that the Creator creates, directs all the creations, and He alone made, and will make everything. So, a Creator God. I believe with perfect faith the Creator is unique. There is no uniqueness like His at all. He alone is our God, who was, is, and will be. So a pure monotheistic perspective. I believe with perfect faith that the Creator has no body and is unaffected by affections of the body and is absolutely no comparison to Him. You can hear a bit of the anti-Christian polemic there.
But it's
right?
also very confusing when you look at the Hebrew Bible, and there's all this reference
Well,
to the
Maimonides-
God of faith, the face, and the
Yeah.
hand, right hand. And,
Well, Maimonides is very clear that those are always allegorical.
Always
because
allegorical.
there's no way God could have a body because then he'd be limited. I believe with perfect faith that the Creator is the first and the last. This is clearly an anti-Gospel of John statement because Jesus is described as the Alpha and the Omega,
Right.
the first and the last. I believe with perfect faith, to Him alone it is fitting to pray, and to none aside from Him is it fitting to pray.
like Mary.
Like the angels or the saints or the intercessors, exactly. I believe with perfect faith that all the words of the prophet are the truth. Number 7, I believe with perfect faith the prophecy of Moses our rabbi was true. He was the father of the prophets, those earlier than he and those who came after him. Now who is he responding to there? Who's sometimes called the seal of the prophets?
Muhammad.
It's Muhammad, that's right.
Muhammad, yeah.
Right, Muhammad is the seal of the prophets, the best one. Prophecy 3.0, right?
Yeah.
So if Moses in the Torah is 1.0 and Jesus in the New Testament is 2.0 from the Islamic perspective, Muhammad and the Quran are 3.0 and done. 3-point last, right? Over. So here the claim is that he is the first one, but he's also the best one. Better than those before him and better than those after him. I believe with perfect faith that all the Torah in our hands was given to Moses our rabbi. I believe it will not be exchanged. There will not be another Torah written by the Creator. So now this is again anti-Christian and
anti-Quran.
and anti-Muslim.
Very much,
Right.
yeah.
But doesn't that limit him, that they say he wasn't supposed to be limited by anything? Isn't that a limitation?
Oh, that he can't write another one? Well, he did the
Yeah.
best the first time. Why do you have to do it again?
Well, if he's unlimited, he can do whatever he wants.
That's true, and he did, and he made the book that was perfect the first time.
Well, yeah, I suppose.
You're saying he can't make it perfect the first time?
No, but I don't think that means he can't do it again.
This is the George Carlin. Can God make a rock so big you can't lift it? Dilemma. Okay.
I don't even know who George Carlin is.
Oh, the stand-up comedian George
He's a
Carlin.
comedian, yeah.
He's hilarious.
I'm impressed.
I don't know.
I'm very impressed.
Yeah. Okay. And number 10, I believe with perfect faith, he knows all the doings of humanity and all their thoughts. So this is not just a creator God before the universe, a la Aristotle. This is one that's engaged in the world. And number 11, he rewards well those who keep his commandments and punishes those who breaks his commandments. He knows if you've been sleeping. He knows if you're awake. He knows if you've been bad or good, and he will make a list and check it twice about who's naughty and who's nice. Number 12, I believe with perfect faith in the coming of the Messiah, even though he tarries, so I wait for him to come every day.
Still waiting.
And still waiting. And finally, I believe with perfect faith there will be a resurrection of the dead at the time the desire comes from the Creator, and praise.
So that's very non-biblical. I mean,
yeah, this is clearly rabbinic theology,
Yeah.
right? But it doesn't matter. I mean, this is what he believed all Jews should believe, and the vast majority of Jews do not score 13 out of 13 on this list. I would say the vast majority of Jews might score 4 or 5 on this list, right? So they might believe in it. They might believe in a creator God, and maybe he's engaged in the world, but reward and punishment, I don't know that I see that consistent. A Messiah and the resurrection of the dead, they're much more likely to be skeptical on those. Bronis, your hand up?
Can I ask a question about 5?
Sure.
So I've noticed something that I wasn't aware of in maybe some Hasidic communities, of this idea of really, really great people who are no longer living, that they have this like thread connection, and that that by visiting their graves or praying somehow that you can communicate. So is this, you said Orthodox, so is this something that's recited in Hasidic communities? And if so, how do they square that?
So this is not unique to Hasidic communities. There's a grave in Israel, which is supposedly the grave of Shimon Bar Yochai, who supposedly wrote the Zohar, the founding book of Jewish mysticism, where people will go to pray for intercession. They'll pray for pregnancy if they're barren, or to find a marriage match if they can't find one. And people will do pilgrimages to the grave of the Baal Shem Tov in Uman in Ukraine. And they also have not this practice is not restricted to Ashkenazi Jews even. Moroccan Jews have a cult of the saints where they go, even now we'll go back to Morocco and visit the graves of the holy saints and pray for intercession and so on. So, this is one of those cases where if there's a will to explain it away, you can do it. So they'll say, well, no, this isn't violating this rule because I'm not praying to them. I'm talking to them to encourage
Asking them for help.
something, or looking. Yeah, like I'm not praising him and bowing to this person. I'm, asking for their intervention. What does it mean to pray, and how do you? You can split hairs on anything. So my guess is that this is part of a prayer book that I took the text from the Art Scroll Siddur, which is sort of a mainline Orthodox to ultra-Orthodox document, but it might not be Hasidic enough for some of the Hasidic communities. They might have their own prayer book that they would use, and so maybe they choose not to include that one. But again, I find it very unlikely they would admit that they're breaking that kind of a prohibition. They would find a way around it, that they're, it's the same way that you can get on an elevator that stops on every floor because it's running automatically. Or the idea of the Shabbos Goy, where you invite a non-Jewish person over to do something for you, but you can't ask them directly to do it for you, so you invite them over and then say, boy, it's really dark in here. And hopefully they get the hint and turn on the light. Or it would really profit someone if he would do that, and so you sort of work around it that way. And actually, this happened to me at a funeral that I co-officiated, to get back to this concept of minhag. So it was a family
It's so
where...
funny because
Yeah?
I think the story that you're going to tell, I was just thinking about it before we got on. We'll see if it's the same story.
I only have so many. So I was doing a funeral where one of the children was Orthodox and one of them was secular. And so I did the service in the sanctuary, the funeral home, did the eulogy, and then the Orthodox rabbi did a graveside service for them the way that he would do it, and that way each kid had sort of a full service for them. They were very happy with how it turned out. But after the graveside service, the Orthodox rabbi came up to me and he said, "I noticed your yarmulke blew off," which is a classic talk around, because if he said to me directly, "I noticed you're not wearing a yarmulke," that's too confrontational. That's accusing me of sinning on purpose, and so you give them the benefit of the doubt and you say, "I noticed it blew off." And I knew what he was doing, so I said back to him, "Well, it's not my minhag to wear the yarmulke."
And then you melted his mind.
I don't know that he understood,
That,
like, what do you mean it's not your minhag? But to be honest, my father never wore one in my lifetime, and he took his off when he was in college. On my mother's side, her grandfather was the one that became secular. My great-grandfather was the one who left yeshiva. So I haven't had yarmulkes on either side of my family for quite a while. So it really isn't my minhag. And my community never had people wear them either, growing up in a humanistic congregation. So it really wasn't my minhag, and the rabbi was a little surprised by that, but I'm unabashedly living in a world where I'm choosing from tradition. So I'll do a eulogy at a graveside. I'll have people cast earth on the grave. That works. Wearing a yarmulke, reciting the traditional Kaddish, that doesn't work for me. So in some ways, humanistic Judaism is a reflection of this reality that people are living with a foot in the traditional world and emotional attachments and inheritance, and a foot in the modern world and making their own choices. Some of you may know that the Greek word heresia, which is the basis for heresy, actually means choice. So being able to make choices, or choosing something that tradition didn't allow you to choose, is one of the signs of modernity, that we are in a heretical age. There's actually a sociologist, Peter Berger, wrote a book called The Heretical Imperative, that talks about how modernity forces you to choose, because now no one's telling me what to wear. No one's telling me what to eat, or how to shave my beard, or whom I can marry. Once the world is less traditional like that, now you have freedom to make choices.
same
So
story, by the way.
Oh, was the same story? Okay, good. I'm glad I'm consistent. So one of the challenges that we have in dealing with the broader Jewish world, even in the Reform and Conservative worlds, is that some people have a kind of creationist approach to Judaism. They imagine that things have always been the way they are now. Moses had a bar mitzvah. And it doesn't make any sense, because even the word bar in bar mitzvah is Aramaic, which is from many centuries after Moses supposedly lived, but that's how it works. And they, like, if they pictured Abraham in their mind, they'd picture someone with a black hat and a long beard, and what they're used to seeing.
Looking like a nice Russian.
Right, but we've seen that. If you were part of our Jewish culture class, we talked about Passover, and we saw examples of medieval Haggadot, where if they were done in Italy in the 1300s, the illuminations looked like they were leaving Italy, even when they were leaving Egypt. And the clothing of Pharaoh's army was like the Crusaders. And I mean, that everyone has this kind of eternal present in the religious world, and they don't see the difference necessarily between past and now, but they assume things have largely always been the same way. And even more importantly, in terms of what Jews do to observe their Judaism, the sense is that there was an original author. Or if you're a little more secularized, you might say the authors, the ancestors. They defined what to do and how to do it, and what to say while you're doing it, and what to wear while you're doing it. And they have absolute authority and control. And we have less knowledge, less wisdom, less holiness than the authority of the past. So you have to fit your way into tradition. You have to make it work for you, but there's certain things you can't change. And we'll get this sometimes thrown back at us if we do have a modified version of a humanistic Kaddish, or our song Na'aseh Shalom, we will make peace, instead of Oseh Shalom, he will make peace. And people say, who are you to change this? How dare you change this? You're not allowed to change this. Because on some level, the ancestors, the past, or the capital A author have defined what you have to do and how you're allowed to do it. Now, we're not creationists here in a sense of, biology, geology, or in the sense of culture and cultural evolution. We're evolutionists. And from our perspective and our study of the Jewish past, Judaism has always changed in new generations. They adopt the reclining at the Seder in the model after Roman feast. Even the word afikomen comes from the Greek epikomenos, which means what you eat after the meal. It's a simple translation in some ways. And we also are willing to say, and this is something we're more willing to say, I think, in Humanistic Judaism than some of the other movements, that reinterpretation by the present can trump the past. Now, that's been the case historically too. In the Bible, it says very clearly, an eye for an eye, hand for hand, foot for foot. It's in Latin called lex talionis. It's a direct physical, corporal punishment for a violation. But the rabbis, even in the days of the Mishnah, so from around 0 to 200 CE, when they saw those rules, they said, this isn't workable. For example, what if someone with one eye puts out someone else's eye? Well, now you're going to take out my other eye and make me totally blind? Is that compensation for the other person having less depth perception? That's not fair. And how are you going to legally enforce cutting off the hands? I mean, it's unworkable. So they decided eye for an eye means monetary compensation. So their interpretation trumped the literal meaning of what's in the text. Well, my favorite example, which I use in every middle school class I teach, is the stubborn and rebellious child should be stoned to death.
Right,
Well, the rabbis realized this would mean the end of humanity. If you know, everyone has a stubborn and rebellious child at some point, or you are one. And so the reality is they interpret it away. You have to do this many bad things and do this many bad things in another way, and both parents have to agree, and the parents can't be lame or deaf or blind because they can't meet the criteria, and in the end, they basically defined it out of existence. So these are examples where the rabbis have trumped the past with their interpretation, but they don't want to admit it. They're very reluctant. They don't just say, this law is bad, cancel. We're not going to write it in the next Torah we copy. You can't do that. I mean, even the Constitution, any version you see still has that obnoxious 3/5 clause in it because that was the original text. And you can amend it, but you can't eliminate it. So in many ways, rabbinic law is like the amendments that can reinterpret or reframe what's in the founding document, but you can't cancel it. Now, another thing we're willing to say is that more recent generations may know more and may be more advanced than the older ones. So older is not necessarily better. You know, ancient cosmology, ancient medicine. I would not want to go to a traditional doctor. I want to go to a modern doctor. In fact, I'm almost inclined to get younger doctors because they're more fresh out of med school and are up on the current research. So this is one of those dilemmas. On the other hand, the experienced diagnostician might have more skills and experience that would help them. You know, you have to find your right balance there. But certainly when you talk about knowledge of science, knowledge of psychology, of evolution, values when it comes to gender roles, more recent generations are better. More reflect our values of self-determination and tolerance and celebration of diversity, and are more aware of the way people actually work. Not knowing genetics, not knowing psychology, that's a flaw that you can't blame the ancients for, but that doesn't mean they get a pass either when you're trying to find out what's the best way to deal with this problem.
Germ theory.
Or germ theory, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, that's a kind of a key one.
Ultimately, it comes back to that question of the author. Was it an author, capital A, or was it the infallible ancestors, or was this all created by people? And if you decide it was all created by people, then people are fallible. People could do their best. Over time, with multiple refinements and interpretations, it can get better. But in the end, they're fallible. They do their best, and we might disagree with them. And more importantly, if people made it, then people have changed it, and people can change it now, based on new circumstances. So if we found new foods to eat for the bitter herb when it was time for Passover, then we can find new foods if we're vegetarian and don't want to have a lamb shank on the Seder plate. It's one more shift based on current values and circumstances. So we have the choice now in our modern non-traditional free world where we can readapt traditional things or create new ones. So some people like the idea of taking traditional prayers and adapting them in some way. So they have a humanistic version of a Kaddish and a humanistic version of a Shema, and that works for them. Others like the idea of creating something new. And some people try to have their tradition and eat it too. So they'll keep the traditional text in the Hebrew, but then the English translation isn't really a translation. It's sort of a riff on the theme of what's in the original, but it doesn't use the more obnoxious language that's in the original. It doesn't talk about God as a king or God as male, even though the Hebrew says hu, which means him, or melech, which means king. The Hebrew remains unchanged because it's the tradition, but the English can be sovereign of the universe. And no gendering in that either, right? Sovereign is any gender, not just a king, which is male. So people try to have their tradition and translate it in some new ways too. But, you know, we do this plenty of times. As I mentioned, you can each break a glass. It doesn't have to be a gender-exclusive thing. Or some humanistic Jews like the idea of having the mezuzah, which is the box on the doorpost, but not filling it with the traditional text, which is all about divine reward and punishment, and it has the Shema with the statement of monotheism and so on. Maybe they have other texts they put in there. They might like the song Hine Matov, Behold How Good It Is for People to Dwell Together, or some other poems of dwelling, or something original that they write themselves. Or they leave it blank to let people imagine what's in there, what they want it to be. But the idea of having a mezuzah to mark the home as a Jewish house doesn't have to be a good luck charm. Some people treat it that way. In fact, even in the Orthodox world, you'll sometimes hear people say, well, if you're having a run of bad luck, check your mezuzah and make sure it's, you know, not you can still read the scroll and it's not at the wrong angle or whatever. So we don't treat it like, you know, a horseshoe or a four-leaf clover. But it can still still have resonance and be meaningful for us in our reinterpretive stance. And for some people, wearing the kippah actually is part of their minhag. They've decided this is something that's Jewish, that makes them feel Jewish, and they want to adopt it. Some have even done it more recently as a sign of solidarity in public to out oneself as a Jew in an era where that can be a dangerous thing to do. Some people will do that on purpose as a sort of a, you know, take that to the people who would harm those who dress like that all the time. And that is one of the privileges of the more secularized Jews, is that we're not obviously Jewish on the street in a way that an Orthodox or ultra-Orthodox Jew is for someone who would target someone like that. I mean, in the end, it's a paradox. Culture makes people, and people make culture. Right? I didn't make the culture I was raised in. I was raised in it, and it had tremendous influence on me. It's an unconscious influence. But I can also create culture. I've chosen to sing certain songs to my kids on Friday nights or when we light Hanukkah candles, and so that for them becomes the culture that they're raising. So we're making choices all the time. We're creating culture, and we're created by culture. Sometimes it's conscious, sometimes it's not. And so in the end, we ask the question of how best to understand our past. And I use a metaphor that actually is also used by the Israeli writer Amos Oz, where he talks about being a Jew in the modern world, especially a secularized Jew, is like being an heir. You're an inheritor. Imagine one inherits a full attic. Some of the objects there are still beautiful. Others have fallen apart and can be discarded. Others are of personal or historical interest, and some require cleaning or modification to work in your own home. Each person evaluates this inheritance differently, displaying certain items and storing away others. So too, each modern Jew examines their heritage, finds what is personally meaningful, and stores away the rest. It's still theirs, even if the authority of the present has chosen to live differently. Or maybe someone else in another branch of the family finds it more meaningful. So if you're an heir, it's still your home to make your choices, but it's all yours to choose from, and to adapt into new settings if need be, but also to choose not to do. And that very choice itself is not traditional. It's not like the proverbial tevya and the shtetl had the right of choice. They didn't. In fact, the ones that chose sometimes were shown the door or pushed back into the fold. There was some flexibility. Certainly in Sephardic and Mizrahi Jewish communities, they were a little more laid back on some of those questions of absolute private observance. But the community setting was traditional, and those were the expectations. The fact that we make even non-traditional communities, like Reform or Conservative or Reconstructionist or Humanistic Jewish communities, the very freedom to make our own communities that differ in practice is a sign of the modern era. That before it was the synagogue of your town, and you did it, and that's how you did it. That was it. The idea of the diversity of synagogues based on variety of practice is something relatively new. I will say, though, that the diversity of synagogues based on personality conflicts is very old. In fact, you even have in the Greek city of Salonika, which was home to a large number of Ladino-speaking Sephardic Jews that had been exiled from Spain and Portugal, you had the Mallorca synagogue and the New Mallorca synagogue, and the Valencia synagogue and the New Valencia synagogue, because, you know, they leave, they get pissed off, but they're all traditional, right? They have this sort of consensus of practice in that world, but you can still have another synagogue if you don't like those jerks over there. That's still universal.
I think that's true with every group.
Oh,
That's
Just
right.
Groups hive off and create, I mean, it seems to be a limit of how long a group lasts before there's a personality conflict.
Well, I've always said that the hardest part about this work is dealing with people. You know, it'd be a lot easier if there weren't any people involved. But as there are people, we have to work with what we've got. So, any general thoughts, comments, questions before we look at our discussion questions?
I just had one quick question.
Sure.
Going back to the idea of saints.
Uh-huh.
Who are saints in Jewish tradition? And
They're generally idealized rabbis, you know, or rabbis who
sort
were
of prominent
preeminent
in
at their
past
era.
sort of thing.
Right. I mean, certainly in the Hasidic world, it was generally the Rebbe, who is already seen as a kind of intercessor between you and God.
Right.
The idea is that the Rebbe is holy enough that he can cling to God, and you sort of cling to the Rebbe in his coattails, and that gives you access to that divine insight and connection.
But this is sort of a traditional, I mean, there's no like in the Catholic Church where you have a process. in
There
which
are
someone
there
becomes-
are a couple examples of that, less so in the Hasidic world, but definitely in the North African, what's called Maghrebi or Mughrebi Jewish culture. There are a few women figures that have taken on that kind of a saint role. And look, this is a case again of assimilation to the surrounding culture, because in North African Muslim culture and Berber culture,
saints,
there's
yeah.
clearly a
Yeah.
strong tradition of saint veneration and
Yeah.
shrines and
Yeah.
going to the
Yeah,
graves.
for sure.
So Jews had a parallel. They
so
were
you didn't
influenced.
have to be a martyr.
No, it was not the martyrdom and then miracles after you die and the whole Catholic rigmarole. It was a different kind of dynamic. And again, people are shocked to hear the Jews have saints and worship like that. But guess what? We're like everybody else.
I'm not shocked, I'm just wasn't that aware of that particular, so it's kind of interesting.
Right, right. Well, I mean, even in Ashkenazi lore, there's the idea of the Dybbuk, which is the dispossessed soul of the dead that takes over somebody's body because there's some issue that needs to get resolved. And so, the idea of ghosts and disembodied spirits, again, you'd say it doesn't sound particularly purely monotheistic and the resurrection after the dead, but it found its way in there.